I'm joined today as our keynote speaker, as I said, by Sir Paul Altman. I don't think Sir Paul needs any introductions in Barbados. Sir Paul is one of the country's eminent businessmen and has been with over 40 years experience in real estate, and he's been responsible for many of the big projects and innovative projects in Barbados, from things like Royal Westmoreland and Sugar Hill and Lime Grove, and various other projects over time. But the thing that's important for this session is that Sir Paul also has a passion for heritage, and he is a past president of the Barbados National Trust, and over a long period of time he's been involved in heritage type projects, such as Arlington Museum in Speightstown, and also the synagogue project in Bridgetown, which is one of the projects that he's going to talk to us about today. Today he's going to share his wide experience of working in Bridgetown on these various difficult heritage projects, but also giving us some of his visions for the future of the city. Also with me today on the panel is Dr. Janice Cumberbatch. Now, Janice is a lecturer at the Centre for Resource Management and Environmental Studies at Cave Hill at the University of the West Indies, and she has a wide experience of environmental and planning issues. She's also got a particular interest in heritage tourism, and in the past was a deputy director of the Barbados National Trust. And our third panelist is Richard Gill, who also joins us, and he's been in practice as a town planner for 53 years. I mean, a lifetime and a half, Richard, I think. He started work in the newly formed Town and Country Development Office, and later went on to set up in private practice at Richard Gill Associates, where he's provided valuable advice to the government and to private clients across Barbados over many years. In his own words, Richard has told me he's trying very hard to retire and hand over his practice to his son, Andy. Good luck. I hope you manage it, Richard. We're really happy to have you with us as well to share your vast experience of planning work in Barbados. At this stage, before we go into Sir Paul's presentation, could I ask Joy to put up the first poll? So if people could see this, we're really, really interested in who's with us today. So if you could submit your answer to these questions, then we'll have an idea of who's in the audience. So if you could do that now. Okay, Joy, do we have some answers on that one? Right. So the bulk of the people, as is normal with our audience, are the land use professionals and people from government organizations. Great, that's lovely to see. Okay, well, that's the introductions done. So if I can hand over now to Sir Paul, we're really looking forward to your contribution today. Sir Paul.
Thank you, Sandy. And let me sort of start by saying that I recognize that I have a time constraint, which is always good because I can go on this subject much longer than the time that is allotted today. And allow me to thank the Barbados Town Planning Society for inviting me to share some experiences and views on today's topic, which is Bridgetown revitalization, a doorway to regeneration. My connection with your profession goes back to the days of Luther Bourne, Lionel Nurse, of course, Richard Gill, who was with us, and more recently to Mark Cummins. My connection with Bridgetown goes back as well to regular visits to my parents' store, the Broadway dress shop, which was on the first slide, I believe. And that goes back to the 1950s. The store was at the top of Broad Street, where Chafette is today, opposite Nelson, which is, of course, not there now. It was across from Parliament, from Fogarty's and the Women's Self-Help. It occupied 2 levels with a Flying Fish Club restaurant on the 3rd floor, accessed by a winding set of steps. There was a hive of activity in front of the store. And that is depicted again in that first slide, where you see the schooners that were offloading along the wharf road, trucks and donkey carts, lighters loaded with sacks of sugar being rowed to ships in Carlisle Bay, vehicles up and down Broad Street. Of course, it was 2-way traffic, lots of activity. And some of that traffic was moving on to Swan Street and Roebuck Street, where lorries and vans were lined up in front of the wholesale food distributors. And they were loading for deliveries to shops throughout the island. Of course, there were no major supermarkets, so regular transfer of food that, as we say, could keep. Everyone had to come to town. Now, what happened? We all know how business moved away from town, how empty buildings today can be purchased at the 1960s prices. Yes, that is the result of a failed business environment. And that, believe me, in my area of business, I run into every day, trying to understand and reinvent how these buildings can be put to some useful purpose. Well, all is not lost. Revitalization is possible. It will happen, and here is how, and here is why. Thomas Friedman's book, Hot, Flat, and Crowded, published in 2008, quoted an interesting statistic from the United Nations, which stated that in 2008, more than half of humanity were living in towns. Friedman noted that the Associated Press had reported that by 2030, that's 10 years from now, the population in cities is expected to grow to 5 billion out of a total population on this earth of 9 billion. This would be attributed to lifestyle and connectivity and the sharing of common facilities. I'm sure that a high proportion of this move back to town will be led by a younger demographic, more equipped financially and technically to work, live, and play in one place. If we, as developers and planners, are revitalizing Bridgetown, the first consideration after saving our heritage component has to focus on use and sustainability. Very important, the sustainability aspect. We speak of adaptive reuse and repurposing. However, no one is going to get actively involved if there is not opportunity for financial viability. As I lead into some specific projects that I have a direct connection with, I will paint a picture of global trends and suggest that these projects in themselves could lead the move back into town. I often sit back and paint a mental image of the map of Bridgetown with the projects that I describe all underway, dotted throughout the map. And in my mind, the spaces in between simply get filled in as a natural follow-on until the map is complete. Let me paint this map out for you. I'll start with the Synagogue Historic District, followed by the Carnegie Library, move on to Roebuck Street, Marshall Hall, the Pierhead, and end by stepping from preservation into a futuristic Pelican Island. Now, I know I'm stepping out here and I apologize, but I thought that I simply had to do that. This story of the synagogue project starts 38 years ago. The synagogue was derelict. It was acquired by the government, compulsorily acquired, to build a new Supreme Court. More land was needed, and government wanted to remove some adjacent graves to expand the site. That was not going to happen. Cod's House had been demolished, and that Cod's House was the location of our first parliament where the Emancipation Bill was signed. That was enough. Prime Minister Tom Adams to the rescue. I was able to appeal to him, and in turn, the Supreme Court was relocated on the condition that I would take responsibility to make a restored synagogue happen. I had located photographs of the synagogue in its prime in the Shilston Library at the Barbados Museum. Hundreds of meetings later, working from what I describe as a dream master plan, and over a period of 38 years, we now have an incredible showpiece, thanks to so many. And I would like to point out two gentlemen that we all know well, and I'm referring to Sir Trevor Carmichael and Mr. Geoffrey Ramsey, two of the most dedicated people supporting heritage and preservation. The Dream Master Plan imagined the entire city block included in the project, today's Synagogue Historic District. This plan was completed some 5 years ago and includes the restored synagogue, a mikveh. Not many people know that word, but a mikveh is a bath that is a ritual bath, but it's also a bath that has to be fed by moving water, a natural spring. And let us remember that there was no actual piped water into Bridgetown at that time. That was before 1654, because the thinking goes that the mikveh is built prior to the synagogue, which was built in 1654. So we have the mikveh, then we have a museum which supports the synagogue. We have a social hall which we have labeled the Shilston Social Hall, a restored fire station, repurposed as a cafe and an art gallery. And we even have a fire museum. Now, not many people are keen to see what a fire museum looks like, but we felt a responsibility to tell the story of the fire service in Bridgetown. And of course, in the fire museum, we also have a history of fires in Bridgetown. Not many people remember that there were what is referred to as great fires that burnt down many buildings in Bridgetown all at once. But if you're interested, they're in the Fire Museum, that story. And the synagogue includes a restored artisans building with artisans, shoemakers, and seamstresses and tailors, as well as a restored graveyard with stones dating back to the 1660s, some of the oldest gravestones in Barbados. There's a monument to Emancipation, where Cod's House was, and a park for cars. Now, we don't ever refer to it as a car park. And I think everyone will agree I'm sure everyone that is here today has seen it. The synagogue dates back, as I said, to 1654, which makes it the oldest synagogue in this part of the world. So I can say that all of that speaks to the historic nature of this site. And of course, the most important guarantee that came out of this project when it was completed is that it will not fail, everything being equal, as a historic site. And the reason is that when we put the project together, we ensured that it would be self-funding. So the self-funding comes from visitation and from car park revenue. And so far, we are meeting our targets, even in these bad times. Now, the slide that you're seeing here shows the synagogue in the center at top. It shows the artisan shops before, of course, before they were restored. I think the invitation to this meeting shows them restored. It shows what was known as the Weights and Measures building, but really that was part of the old fire station. And that is a wonderful restoration. It shows the Carnegie Library, where I am walking across to now as my next stop. It shows the Montefiore fountain. And it shows the old town hall, which, as we see, dates back to 1732. And that is all part of where we're headed now. So as I say, let me complete another dot on the city map by moving over to the Carnegie Library, passing the Montefiore fountain, a gift to the town from a member of the synagogue. Montefiore was a member of the synagogue. And it was given to commemorate the piping of water into Bridgetown. I'm not sure many people know that. It was moved from Lower Broad Street to this location at about the time that the Carnegie Library, another gift, was built. How can this Coral Stone work of art be left to fade away? Mr. Jeff Ramsey, who chairs the Barbados Heritage Task Force, agreed with a plan that I had, and that plan is to take the $500,000 annually that the government is spending to rent a temporary building, which the library has occupied for the past 10 years or more, and to use that money. And I'll tell you how. You simply, with that money sort of in your pocket, you can borrow $5 million or more to restore the Carnegie Library. And the $500,000, or the rent money now, would be used to pay back the loan. And as I was taught at school, when we solve a problem as easily as that, we say QED, quod erat demonstratum, or as we said at school, quite easily done, QED. Now, how to make this happen? Which door to knock on? I made the synagogue project sound easy. I knocked on many doors. Well, Jeff is now the one knocking. Hopefully this time it won't take 38 years. Roebuck Street is my third dot. Or should I say, Sir Trevor Carmichael's. Notice these names keep repeating themselves. Sir Trevor, Jeff Ramsey. And that sign that you're seeing, something tells me that the same Jeff Ramsey may have been involved in designing that sign. It's very similar to the signs that we have at the synagogue. Now, Sir Trevor initiated the Roebuck Street Restoration Trust. For many years, the University of Florida, and before I get into that, I think this photograph just is wonderful. We should have that somewhere hung up in something that I will describe later on, which will be the sort of center that I'm talking about, interpretive center. I'll speak about that. But let me tell you about Roebuck Street and the story as we have it now. And I start by saying that for many years, the University of Florida has cooperated with heritage projects in Barbados and the Caribbean through their PIC, PIC, or Preservation Institute for the Caribbean program, led by their School of Architecture. The synagogue project had support from the PIC program 38 years ago, and there are others that they helped with. They were now willing to assist with the mapping of Roebuck Street. The entire street with the buildings on both sides was laser scanned in 5 days by 3 students and their professor. The 3D display is amazing. I'm sorry we can't look at it here today, but it's something that should be seen. Another team had mapped Spikestown in 1995. Now, at that time, it took 17 students and 3 professors 3 weeks to complete. That just demonstrates what new methods can achieve. Sir Trevor and his committee, and Jeff and I sit on that committee, are following the well-established approach. That is, engage with the stakeholders, and that is the businesses in the area, establish a master plan, raise funds, and most of all, get started. Everyone responds when there is positive energy, that is getting your hands dirty, but basically by doing something. And here we have a wonderful example of a Roebuck Street building with living quarters upstairs, most probably, and shops downstairs. And my sense is that the gate on the right-hand side, which is different to the three doors, leads you through to a back garden. And I will talk about that. The first effort focused on the police sports club. This is the Roebuck Street Trust. And it was painted and minor repairs done. You can see how well it was painted. Berger Paints then agreed to work with all property owners along Roebuck Street to carry out the painting of buildings at a major price reduction. And this is happening as we speak. The vision is to landscape, plant, and illuminate the area in order to attract activity, to bring back life with cafes, bars, and even living quarters along the street. Few people know that there are gardens and backyards in many of these buildings. And these are accessed only through that particular building. Each building has its own access to its own backyard. The street width allows for parking. So the new reimagined Roebuck Street, when you carry out all of the work and try to get that restoration in place, will have a completely different sense to it. And as I say, when I wrap up Roebuck Street, I said to look, we should tell New Orleans to look out. I can hear the jazz playing already. The message here again is get started and sell the vision. Marshall Hall is the ruin of a showpiece historical building along Pink Street. On this slide, you see the name Bayside Arts District. And that was a name that was going to be used and attached to a redevelopment plan that I will speak about. And you can see that was done in 2016. It is where royalty and dignitaries were entertained in the 19th century. We certainly do not intend to go there again, but there's no harm in recognizing the history and moving on to greener pastures. And of course, you will see the green pastures as I show you the next few slides. But again, a plan for adaptive reuse, and in this case, encouraging neighboring buildings to join in. After all, most are empty or almost empty, and a bold mixed-use opportunity does look like a great approach. The financial feasibility for this project was based on including all of the buildings as well as the open car park between the buildings and the water and the carenage, and that surround Marshall Hall. And these would serve as the, and Marshall Hall would serve as the central point of the development. The numbers, when they were done, that is the financial viability of this project, looked very positive. And here on this slide, just to walk you through some part of the, and there, I think there's more to come, but on the left bottom, you're seeing Marshall Hall restored. Across from it, you're seeing a very modern glass building, which would reflect the old Marshall Hall in it. And in between, you're seeing a walkway plaza that goes right through down to the water. So as I said, the financial viability, when it was considered, was very positive. However, the 2008 financial downturn hit us, and the plans remain on a shelf catching dust like so many others. This project is a discussion on its own. Such a mega project in itself could drive activity into Bridgetown. Marshall Hall is a big dot in my list of dots. Its concept includes the historic building serving as a meeting conference facility with a Caribbean food market attached. This would be complemented by a modern glass building functioning as the Caribbean Design Center, which I pointed out, featuring the best products from the Caribbean, a one-stop shop for Caribbean creative products. There would be a hotel, townhouses, and of course, where better place to put a townhouse than in town? A park, a marina, and the marina, many people are not aware, is already there, some part of it, a good part of it. There would be offices, shops, and a fish fry market, a la Oystins Renewed. And there would be a lot more. Again, this has to happen. That market scene from Charleston gives you a feel, and this other slide after gives you a feeling of what could be there. And the other slide, the top part of the slide, the top picture, points out to that marina. It only needs to fit in the actual slips, but the marina is there protected from the main sea. It has an outer wall. In the background, you're seeing the Marshall Hall in yellow. You're seeing some townhouses on the left. You're seeing the park in the middle. You're seeing that walk through between Marshall Hall and the Design Center, and you're seeing a hotel on the right. And of course, that then blends in with all of the other buildings that are there, and it makes it quite an impressive, I think everyone would agree, opportunity. So Marshall Hall, as I said, has to happen. But the biggest dot of all, and this is the fish fry. If we go back, that is the sense of where the fish fry would be, and that would be located near to the fish market. So that is at the northern end of that area. Of course, the biggest dot in all of my dream plan would be referred to, and everyone knows, as the pier head. And here you see an aerial view of a part of the pier head, but the waterfront. And we have defined this because this is one that is well on its way. I understand that the other part of the pier head has recently been brought to a conclusion in terms of another investor, or it is nearly there, if not there. But this part of the pier head has had plans drawn up for it already, and we will see those in a minute. But if I was to talk about the pier head, I would talk about a project that anchors the town to what I think is our most beautiful beach along Carlisle Bay. If Marshall Hall is a potential showpiece, I would just look across the careenage, and the pier head invites you to the grandest opportunity of them all. Some 20 years ago, it was ready to get started, but failed to do so for two reasons. One reason was that, of course, there's always someone in the party leading the sort of effort that can, as we say, spoil the show. And in this case, the main investor, who was from overseas, appointed someone who I refer to as a flawed party, and I will say no more. That person just couldn't direct their energies as I felt they should have. But the second issue is what I refer to as paralysis by analysis. And of course, with these large projects, I don't ever suggest that they don't need to be analyzed, but too much of that repeated review and the unwillingness to make a start leads to this paralysis. And there was no one willing to pull the trigger. When such projects are reviewed, they're indeed scary. My view is that 100 million, and I believe that was US, is simply 10 million times 10. And if this was divided into separate risks and phases, and other investors brought in, and I actually had circled different phases, and that was when we were looking at the entire scheme back 20 years or more ago, I think that they could have gotten started and not have to be in fear of the large price tag that could have been taken in smaller bites. When I traveled related to this project, I attended the ULI meeting in Missouri at that time, which is the Urban Land Institute of the United States. And the project was critiqued by two of the largest developers for mixed-use projects in the United States. One is the Rouse Corporation and the Simon Corporation. And they critiqued this project for us. Now, we had to be a member, which at that time cost $200 US. Not sure if that's what it costs today, but you can see you can get and seek advice from people who have carried out these projects very successfully, and sometimes they're there ready to help once we know where to go. But if we spend a minute now and look at the planned first phase, you can see that the central area that we all love when we talk about heritage is, of course, what is referred to here as the dry dock or the screw dock. And then if we go towards the bridge, you see some buildings there that, of course, the intention is to rebuild and, of course, to retain as much of the old character and even some of the old walls. And I very recently went into that first building, which is called the House of Pillars. I think of it as the House of Horrors because it must have 200 columns, because that's how they designed it, as a warehouse to support what they were putting upstairs on the first level. But you know, so the repurposing and the redevelopment there, the scheme that was imagined came about after the Prime Minister had talked about that full redevelopment of Carlisle Bay, and in some part at the bottom right-hand side, you see something looking like an oval shape, which was the base for a tower that was going to be 26 stories. Not sure that I mean, that is set back from the road. So in my opinion, now I'm not a planner, but as just a regular citizen, I worry about 26 stories if it was imposing itself on the main road. But set back, I still worry, but not as much. Just my comment. But this beach that I described runs right up Carlisle Bay, and the area that you see green, which is Fort Willoughby, is a green space, a public space, and the public space allows for parking under it, but it is a very welcome space as a part of the project. And there are many other green spaces, as you can see. There's one further back, but that beach area, because the intention is to, and there's some boulders there that had a problem from wave action. And what you see there are, the idea is to put cabanas in behind the boulders and between the boulders to make again, the viability has to come from somewhere. And if these cabanas get lost in some foliage and in the boulders, they don't offend, in my opinion, the sense of what this beach area is all about. And of course, this is the end of the beach. There's nowhere to go beyond there. So when I talk about the Pier Head, I talk again from 20 or more years of being a part of it. And again, the project just needs to get started. I am confident that if we had started it back when I first got involved, it would have been completed today and Bridgetown would be buzzing. I have to add that and I said this, particular care for the heritage has always been a part of it. And that now we have a new investor, and we have this new reimagined plan for the waterfront, and for Fort Willoughby. And one of the, as I said, the key areas there is the Screw Dock. We need to get this started. And as I always repeat, no one wants to get into these types of projects. Many people are afraid to get into them all at once. So if we could start with the Screw Dock or dry dock, that would help to build momentum. And we have an investor who is keen. And I would say that this investor is not only keen, he is seasoned. He's a person who has done this type of development. He did something in Ireland that I was privileged to see, which is the Epic Centre in Dublin. And to just give you some more credentials, that centre won the award as the #1 tourist destination in Europe, not in Ireland, not in England, but in Europe. So that brings some sense of who you're dealing with and why we need to hold hands and encourage these people. And I say we need to do more to encourage them. And I mean people that like him that are already committed. I find that once someone starts or completes a project, more attention is paid to finding new investors than to assisting those already here. Again, this project should be the subject of a separate discussion. Bridgetown needs to be managed by establishing an interpretive center. I spoke about this interpretive center where anyone can visit and see all of the dots that I have referred to, where they can get advice and most of all, get answers. A one-stop shop for assembling and receiving approvals. I always say when I talk to people in planning, and this is not a criticism, I think they all agree with me on this, that and I say planning, I mean planning can only take it so far. Government then has to really give it the final blessing. And I always say that it is better to tell someone no than to keep them waiting if you're not sure. But the need for a speedy decision is what I think is absolutely important if we're going to get where we want to go on redeveloping Bridgetown. Today, the investment climate is showing signs of recovery, even during this pandemic. I would like to leave you with some exciting news. Hidden beneath this slow recovery is a volcano. I say, yes, I describe it as a volcano ready to erupt. I'm seeing this as people are getting pent up sort of energy to want to go out and do something. They're all locked up and they're anxious. That is my personal view. And Bridgetown is better positioned to take off now than it ever was. The new world of information technology, smart cities, and remote offices, in my opinion, will provide the energy to revitalize Bridgetown and all of Barbados. We are sitting on the cusp of this. And now I will close by straying outside of Bridgetown to a location adjacent to our harbour. And in that location, and we have a slide for this, it takes us into imagining the future. And that future would involve building what I refer to as Pelican Island. And could we have that slide? Or
sorry, it's not available, so Paul, apologies.
Okay, well, I will describe it. It's a 50-acre island. It's built on a reef where the harbor was built. What I'm saying here is the harbor was built 60 years ago, and just simply by doing the same thing and going further north, you can build this island. And the island, the feasibility for it is simply, like anything else, what goes onto it. And it includes a marina, a shopping area, hotels, apartments. And I will just say that it is futuristic, but it's not a dream. And I share this passion to have an island built with our Prime Minister. And this Pelican Island, I think, will come to happen. And of course, the only thing that I would say that we need to make everything happen is someone to sign and to write the check. So let us continue to look for those people. Let us continue to push all of these projects from a planning point of view and from a developer's point of view. And I know that both hands will come together, and I look forward to seeing a lot of these projects happen. As I say, we are on the cusp. So I will end there and say thank you all, and I hope that I gave you some information that can provoke questions.
Right. Thank you very much, Sir Paul. I'm sure that's a very stimulating discussion, and we'll get lots of questions later on. Before we move on to the next discussion, can we have the second poll that we were going to run? And this one says, what do you think the value of heritage, do you think the value of heritage is well understood by the population? And it really is just a query on people's understanding of heritage. Right, it looks as people think that more people than don't appreciate heritage. I think this has always been a challenge in Barbados, that people fully understanding the benefit and the potential that heritage gives you, and making the most of it, really. But okay, that's great, thank you. Okay, I think we can move on to the next section now. Obviously, we've had a very stimulating discussion from Sir Paul, and we all have loads of questions to ask him. So I'll hand over first to Dr. Janice Cumberbatch, and for her to make a few comments and observations, and to ask some questions of Sir Paul.
Thank you very much, Sandy. I hope everybody's hearing me well, and thanks very much to the Town Planning Society for the invitation today. This is actually a cool way to spend a Friday afternoon, so I'm really happy to be here. And sitting at the feet of the giants, or being sandwiched between a couple of giants this afternoon, is a privilege. I grew up in town, so let me be clear immediately that I have a bias. I grew up in Wellington Street. My grandfather had a bread shop on Nelson Street. I am a city girl. I may live in St. Philip now, but my St. Philip friends tell me I will always be a commute. So I've declared I have a bias. I love Bridgetown. And there's so many things that Sir Paul evoked for me. I mean, obviously, warm, fuzzy memories, but then several questions. And I hope to throw these questions at Sir Paul, as well as Richard and our audience as well. In no particular order, let me start with the fact that you call some other giants. You know, you spoke to Sir Trevor, and you spoke to Jeff. And the question came to me, who are they mentoring? Will we have a gap? Who's being prepared to carry this mantle? Because I honestly believe that Bridgetown is an opportunity to connect our past to our and our future. And the people to carry it there are what we like to call now the millennials. But if they're not yet engaged, there'll be a gap. There'll be that gap when the Sir Pauls, the Richards, the Jeffs, the Trevors, and I dare say the Janices, because, you know, and I young no more neither, are gone. And then they'll have to figure it out. And we should therefore be thinking about opportunities for mentoring. So I want to throw that out there for thinking. And connecting to that is I feel as if when you speak about investment, people think that investment is always somebody from the outside coming into Barbados. But I want you, perhaps, Sir Paul, to tell me a little bit about the opportunities that might exist for local investment strategies. I want to know, as somebody who celebrated her ex-birthday not so many weeks ago, and has 2 youngsters in their early 20s. I want to know how I can get my 2 youngsters in their 20s, for example, to look at renovating and using spaces in town, whether commercially or indeed residentially. When you talk about packages of $10 million, how do we get the banks, the credit unions in Barbados to say, yeah, boy, that's a great idea. And these young people, maybe 20s is too young. I don't know if it's better in the 30s. I have no idea. But I'm back on my issue of mentoring. I'm passing on the mentor, the baton, right? So how do we get that support for them? It is not just a taking them to committee meetings and showing them that and talking with them. It is the financial institutional support to launch them into that space to be early investors in our future, because they are the bridge between that beautiful heritage that's falling apart. I used to complain to my friends in Trinidad that they were letting those lovely buildings around the savannah fall apart. I can't say anything to them no more. I shame, because I look at Bridgetown and I feel now that we are doing the same thing, you know? Just a couple more points, and then I'm going to hand back to you, Sandy, and I'll come back because Paul has given me so many things to think about. New Orleans is another passion of mine. I love jazz. My husband and I enjoy going there regularly just for Jazz Fest. And so the idea that we could have more activities around music in the center of the island is brilliant. But you know, I'm happy to come into town ever so often and go to Frank Coleman Hall. I want to go other places too. Yeah, I want to sit down on the outside of a bar, not just the waterfront cafe, and enjoy that experience. But I want to enjoy that experience with the people who live there, not just the people who are passing through. And so I really want you to talk a little bit more about the residential opportunities in Bridgetown for me, the mixed residential opportunities. And I see your Marshall Hall experience and it excites me, but I want a spot on Browns Beach. I want to be on Carlisle Bay, good and proper, because I see proposals for hotels on Carlisle Bay. And I want to say to you, my grandfather held my hand and took me to the fish market on Browns Beach as a child. So if I could grow old knowing that my son now lives in a home near where I bought fish, I would be proud and excited and happy. Not so much if only people from outside could live there. And something that I'm going to end on before I hand over to Sandy to hand on to Richard is this. Among the many things that we have to resolve, you're quite right, is what I like to call the inertia, right? The fact that we can't seem to accelerate prudently our regulatory process. Why I say accelerate prudently is that you can look at environmental and social safeguards and it doesn't take forever. You can look at it, make a determination and move forward. The technology is there to help us accelerate that. So I agree with you 100% on that. The other thing we have to figure out, the other wicked problem we have to figure out and resolve once and for all is beach access in this country. It is a beautiful beach. I grew up on that beach. I will forever go to that beach. And Barbadians need to know they can forever go to those beaches. And let's not pretend that we don't have those issues. When we talk of our heritage, it is the buildings, but it's the beach. It's the lives of the people. Heritage is living. And so we have to be sure that that baton is passing to make sure that lived heritage continues to flow through that really critical space. So those are my initial comments, Sandy, and I hand over now to Richard.
Right.
Thanks.
Thank you. Some very stimulating comments. Sir Paul, do you want to take them first, or shall we have Richard's comments?
If I may, I am all sort of wound up, ready to answer, Janice.
Okay, I'll let you respond and then we hand over to Richard.
And of course, she has about 3, 4 or more questions. So let me start with the mentoring. Of course, she knows and with me that we have a connection to Cave Hill. and Cahill is basically a wonderful area or place to start this mentoring. I also always say that setting the example is what stimulates people to recognize that these things can be done. So that would be my way of saying there is a way that others can learn, and the younger people, her sons and people of that age, can learn by example and find routes to follow on. And that leads to the next point, which is that it doesn't require these $10 million or $100 million investors. I mean, when I looked at Roebuck Street, I realized that you can buy one of those old buildings that I pointed out on one of the pictures for the same price as you can go and buy one of those nice cars. So, and I mean a very nice car, but okay, 200,000 Barbados dollars. So, you know, why worry about that? I mean, that I can't agree that everyone can afford $200,000, but there are opportunities for what I describe as smaller investors. You know, the banks ought to be able to work with you, and certainly it is one of the attributes of having a trust, a Roebuck Street trust, that could help. And I can't speak for Sir Trevor, but I am on the committee, and I believe that if someone came to us and had a sense of what they wanted to achieve, that I'm in the business of selling the buildings, so I know, and they can be purchased. So I believe that you don't have to have the huge deep pockets in order to get involved. And yes, I agree with Janice completely that the first step to getting to the New Orleans phase is to get started. And I repeated that many times when I spoke today. And I always felt that we as a part of the trust, we had someone lined up to do one of those buildings and set the tone for the others to follow. People will follow when they see something happen that looks good, that works, and that makes sense. And you know, the expression in property business is, if you build, they will come. So if you restore, they will follow. And I'm strong on that. With regard to the new style of operating in towns, I can speak from experience with the project that I still spend many hours on, which is Lime Grove, and the sense that the full sense of shopping, of retail, of going in to buy items has changed. And what you will see happening, and is happening already as we speak at Lime Grove, is that we are changing the direction of what the experience will be. The experience will be just that, an experience. People will go in there and they will be able to see things that they would not be able to see and touch. And I'm not talking about merchandise like clothing, I'm talking about other things. There are things that people need to go and enjoy, bars, restaurants, shopping for food. Of course, you can't do that as easily if, you know, there are new things coming. So the experience in doing that in town, I think would be important, changing the direction of what retail or retail experience, the full definition. And as to beach access, well, of course, one of the major things that was in the plan, which you would have seen, or hopefully would have seen, is a wide access that exists today being maintained for the public to that beach. And of course, I would say that the full way to assure that beach accesses remain is for town planning to insist that they be retained and expanded for development. And I'm aware of projects that are in planning or being planned, and I would go as far as the West Coast, where beach access is a key component of the planning process and of the approval process. So I support all that Janice is saying, and I wasn't born far from town, but I spent a lot of time in town. As you know, my family had a store in town for many years, from the time I was born until the mid-60s. So as a child, I walked from Crumpton Street, where I went to school, back into town many days to get to go home with my parents. So that walk along St. Mary's Row back into Broad Street is one that, and being almost knocked down many times by trucks and buses against the church wall, all of that sticks in my memory. So I know what, you know, we all have our experiences, and I will leave it there. Thank you so much.
Right. Okay. Thank you, Sir Paul. Richard, can we hand over to you now?
Yes, but I'm not sure how much more I can say. I think a lot of it has been covered by both Janice and Sir Paul. It seems to me that obviously I agree with what Sir Paul is saying, that if you can invest in a particular project and bring it to fruition, then other projects in that area will follow. That is absolutely true. What we do not have is what has occurred in places like parts of the UK, London and Liverpool and Newcastle and so on, where there's a particular development corporation which is set up to carry out major development. Now, we don't have to follow that type of model at all. But what I think is needed, and it has come up in instances where people have been discussing local government and the extent to which control should be in local government rather than only in central government. We need an organization within government which has a chief executive or a town manager who has the funds and the authority to get things done. Now, Sir Paul and other people are trying to do this in their particular schemes. You're trying your best to get things done, but it relies in many instances on raising the capital, finding an investor and that type of thing, which will happen in government too. We have the government example of the BTII, which has been involved with hotel or projected hotel development along Carlisle Bay. But there's still something missing where we need some agency, and naively one might think, well, the town planning office is there to do that. But the fact is that the way the planning office is set up and so on, it's not an implementing agency. We need an implementing agency. So that's one thought coming out of that. But not that the agency does what these individual investors are doing. What it does is it pulls things together. It takes that project. If the Spearhead project is a good one and approved, and Sir Paul comes and says, look, we are doing this, fit it into the overall proposal, make sure that everything is kind of working. Don't do anything that's going to hold him up and frustrate his investors and send them away. But at least be some sort of implementation agency, perhaps with funds from the government and that type of thing. So that's one aspect. I remember in Spikestown, there was a little committee set up to do various things. But one of the problems with a lot of these is that there are no funds attached. So you can decide, oh, let's encourage people to repaint their buildings, or let's encourage this and that and the other. But it's good to have a starter project which gets that going, even at a smaller scale. So that need for overall vision and control I see as something beyond just the planners on a physical development plan, taking it to the next stage. And otherwise, the question really is, how much do we have to do to get things really started? What is the point at which you can say we've reached this and now people are investing and things are moving kind of naturally from that investment? And I would like to hear Sir Paul a little bit more on that, because I think that if we see two of these big projects really moving, then there's the feeling that a lot more will happen.
Right, Sir Paul, would you like to comment?
Yeah, I would answer by saying first that, as you would have seen from my presentation, that I'm really referring to big projects. And what I said is that I'm painting that picture of Bridgetown and saying, let me deal with the big projects, and the spaces in between those projects in my mind will fill in themselves. And those are the smaller projects. So I can give the example of the street across, I think it's James Street, across from the synagogue. Immediately, those buildings all were refurbished. Now, you can say that would have been done in any case, but in my mind, the feeling that they were very much being seen now by a revamped synagogue area, they wanted to look better. They, you know, if you come to the party and that one person is dressed up and everyone else is not, the sense is that they need to go and get dressed up. So that is my reason for saying that the infill will happen, and I saw it happen in Whole Town, and it is happening now to some extent in Speightstown. And so that the way to answer the other part of that question, which is the sense of how people can be encouraged to come in and I believe that's the question, and get their project started. And I guess that what I discussed was this interpretive center. And I understand that the interpretive center is something that is actually about to happen in Bridgetown, that one-stop shop. And that really is more of assistance to the small investor, to the small property owner, who doesn't want to go and tie themselves up in paying fees to professionals, whether they're legal, whether they're architects, whether they're planners, whether whatever profession needs to have an input in making a project work. But that those professionals would give up their time, maybe an hour a week, when they could have appointments with people that wanted to come in and have questions answered. And again, I draw reference to some examples that I am aware of that I've seen, and that was the old San Juan in Puerto Rico and Havana in Cuba. Now, Havana certainly doesn't have money, but when I walked around and I had this guided tour of the architecture and the redevelopment in Havana, I was totally impressed. But what they did is they took one person and put them in charge, gave them the authority, and of course this person had to be proven and skilled and the right profile, not to use it for their own gain. But and those people are hard to find, I should say. But Havana, I saw examples of buildings that were restored and done in an amazing fashion, simply because what we were told by this well educated and connected guide that we had, that one person was given the authority to guide the process for each of these parts of that puzzle that were successfully managed and completed. And the other one, of course, is the old San Juan story that I've told for so many years, how old San Juan was restored. Of course, the first thing is the subject of concessions. And I've had this discussion with several government ministers. And government says, well, we can't afford to give concessions because that is money that we need to come in to support our functioning and our government and our economy. And my argument has always been, it isn't going to come. So when you're giving it to developers and these, you know, at any level, you are really not giving away anything that is material, because they're not coming either without these concessions. So the fact that there are concessions is really a major part, and I can say that they're not easy to get. And even when they tell you that you have the concessions, sometimes they're difficult to put your hands on. But they're an important part of stimulating development. And the last thing I will say on that is that the issue of a revolving fund. I remember many years ago, there was a $1 million fund, I think it was under Tom Adams, that was put in place for small property owners to borrow from and pay back over time. And it was, I think, connected with the Barbados National Trust for Heritage. But nobody ever went to take advantage of it. And the $1 million sat there. So it also proves that just by carrying out that important act of providing funding for people to make use of, you need to go a step further. And you know, there are many other stories, but there are many examples. And I always say, follow the best examples, and you can't go too far wrong.
Thank you very much, Sir Paul. I think we should now open it to the public in terms of our audience. And I think Yolanda's been monitoring.
I do have some questions in the chat. I will pose a couple of them and then I'll go to the others. One comes from Israel Map, who said that in the last Bridgetown Revitalization webinar, we had established that the residential aspect is key to the success of revitalization. Have you, Sir Paul, considered a more inclusive design for residents in terms of income, family sizes? You may have addressed that in terms of your big projects, but that's the question that's being posed.
Okay, definitely yes. In fact, you know, the Prime Minister, again, spoke to the point of bringing young Barbadians to live in Bridgetown. And I think that Janice was talking about that as well, asking that question. And the Pierhead project, as it is designed, has apartments that cater to that profile of a Barbadian younger person. And I make no apology to older people like myself, but the people that are going to move to town, as we have heard from all of the studies that have been carried out, the profile is usually younger. And those people don't necessarily need large spaces. So what was devised and planned in the Pierhead project was smaller living units with, as we described, shared and common spaces. So those young people literally can sit in a cafeteria with their laptop and conduct their business. And you know, the full force and efforts that are the full story of Cave Hill is to point people in the direction of setting themselves up as single operators or even creating their own businesses. And many of them are done from laptops. So the living unit is small, it is affordable, and the Pierhead has taken that fully into consideration because it has also created open spaces so that the person buying a unit that is less than 1,000 square feet spends most of their time in the common areas, lounges, in a gym, in the cafes, out on open areas and green spaces. And they really only use the unit for sleeping purposes. I think that it would be wrong to imagine that any space created in these very costly developments could provide large living units at what we call startup home prices. So the process that I described is the one that has been considered.
Thank you very much, Sir Paul. We have another question which relates to the continuation of business expansion in Bridgetown and its development. We require more people to be customers or long-stay visitors, a greater population for that to happen. So what strategies can be employed to facilitate greater spend, visitors, and foot traffic? That query is coming from D. Fenty. I think it may be just anyone on the panel, I don't know. What strategy can be employed to facilitate greater spend on visitors and foot traffic in Bridgetown? That's the question.
Again, I take it that if I don't necessarily have to answer somebody else, but Would you like me to answer?
I'm willing to offer my opinions if you like. Certainly, I will tell you that, and I'm sure that this came up in the last discussion about how certain key things moved out of Bridgetown. So you had to go to town to conduct certain business, and therefore while you were there, you took the opportunity to do other things. I know you don't go to Bridgetown for those things anymore. In fact, a lot of them are concentrated, maybe, especially if it's government related business, you may be able to do it in one of our other urban centers. You may be able to do it in Warrens, or you may be able to do it in Oistins or something like that. And I've heard people say, you know, the fact that people didn't have that, because we're busy and you're going to try to bundle your activities. So if I'm coming to town or if I'm going somewhere, I'm trying to do a lot of things at the same time. So one of the things that would pull me into town is, first of all, the fact that I had to do several things. But beyond that, I need it to be comfortable and convenient. So we now get into the issue of whether I'm going to travel from wherever I am. And unfortunately for you, I'm in St. Philip, so I can get 6 rows. But if I'm coming to Bridgetown, right? And I keep telling y'all, right, when we weren't in COVID, I could be in a credit union from 7 o'clock in the morning, and I had a supermarket that opened at 6. St. Philip is the place to live. But that aside, because we're talking about Bridgetown today, I'm just making a plug for my Philippines. When I come to Bridgetown, I have to get there timely. I'm a busy person. You see traffic, it's going to deter me from coming in. I have to be able to park my car, or I have to have a shuttle that brings me in without hassle. So I want to get there. First of all, I just have to get there, Mr. or Miss Fenty, because I don't know who D Fenty is. And then I have to be comfortable when I get there, okay? My husband would tell you that I am retail therapy is my thing. I love walking through retail spaces all over the world, but it has to be comfortable. You know, after a while of shopping, I want somewhere to sit comfortably. I have a meal and get up and go again. And whenever I'm ready to leave, I have to be able to leave comfortably again. So when I'm there, the price points have to be right. I have to find the things I am looking for, right? So again, think of the demographics. Is it somebody like me who is a middle-aged woman with almost grown children that's shopping? Is it a younger person? Is it an older person? What's the diversity there? Who's done the marketing for what I am shopping for? Why am I going to Sheraton? Why am I going to 6 Roads instead? It isn't only that it's accessible to me. Some of the other reasons I've thrown in there are some of the reasons why I'm not coming. Maybe I'm just not finding what I want, and I'm not finding it at the price point. So I think suppose design issues can create a part of what we want, but it is a collective initiative. And there's another point I wanted to make. If we're talking, for example, of bringing arts into the picture, whether it's musicians or visual arts or whatever, I hope they're a part of the conversation. We can't plan for them, we have to plan with them. So when I know that there'll also be an exhibition, Mr. or Miss Fenty, I really don't know your gender, I am going to plan my event around, oh wait, they got, you know, I've done it. There's a exhibition in Queen's Park. I'm going there to take a look at it because I know Ms. Whittle has done a great job of what she's curated there. And then I'm going to grab something to eat, pick up some things that I need to do, get that form from the department of whatever. Few hours, I had entertainment, business, everything all wrapped up. I'm not leaving town starving, and I'm heading back for home. You got to give me that full experience. I hope that helps to give you a sense of what I certainly, as part of the demographic that you want to bring back into town, would need.
Thank you for that, Janice. And D Fenty did follow up in terms of how the accommodation must be affordable because that work living environment. And I think that's what you just described, where you're comfortable to do both things and it's affordable living. There is, and I believe Kim Holder also made the comment that sometimes the old buildings have absentee owners and it's difficult for people to take up the occupation, the ownership, and to move them into new uses because there are legal issues that need to be resolved. And I have a question from Fallon Best. How important are competitive investment incentives, concessions to bringing investment in the superstructure in Bridgetown? How important are competitive investment incentives? So Paul, that one may be at you.
Yeah, I think I answered that to some extent. that certainly, you know, I think concessions is what I was pointing at. The fact that government concessions are a huge item in terms of encouraging people to come in and invest, and at every level. You see, my point always is that, as I said earlier, concessions is not giving away anything because you're not getting it anyhow. But you're going to get it if you give concessions, because the employment that results from work being done on these buildings, and then the business that will occur in them. And then when you look at the completed package of a street, like, let's take Roebuck Street, all coming together as a unit, as we described it, and Janice likes the jazz, so let's stick with the jazz. Shopping downstairs, sidewalks with cafes, green planting, maybe gas lamps, and parking along that street. I think concessions are going to make it work. And then we talked about that revolving fund. And, you know, I don't believe that it would be, you know, the national insurance certainly could make funds available, because you're not giving money away, you're lending money for development. And that money comes back, as I said, through all of these spin-off gains. So I think all of that needs to be looked at. But I just wanted to quickly touch on the issue that Janice brought up of where she would go and how she would get there and all of this. And there was another dream, and that was when we were looking at the Pierhead and traffic in Bridgetown, the full discussion of how we would remove the choke points coming along Bay Street and coming in from the west and coming in from every side into Bridgetown, and how would we get traffic to move. And I was traveling, and someone told me in London to go to Heathrow Airport and to experience the pod system. And these are little, they look like space capsules, but it's nothing more than like a golf cart with a little bubble on top of it. And these things are solar powered up, and they have little stations like swooshes. And we did a full exercise on that for Barbados, using the route through the Old Constitution River going up to the ABC Highway. And the full cost at that time, and this may be, again, 15 years ago, was something like £60 million. And it was justified as an easily achievable spend, because people would come in and out of town. The area, that corridor along the Constitution River, would wake up with shops, and villages would grow, and there would be stops all along the way. And these stops where people got on and off these pods would be like gas stations where people had shops for food and for this, and then you would have a hotel where the prison was, and literally that movement. And then, wait a minute, we took that pod from the ABC Highway and we said, wait a minute, we can do a loop. That price that I mentioned was not just to get you to the ABC Highway, that was for a loop. You then went through Warrens and came down by the university, down by the harbour, and you linked back up to Fairchild Street, where the Constitution River is. And that was the $60 million spend. And imagine, we had all of these stations, we even figured out how many pods, and we could, and you know what that cost to control? There was one person sitting in a room with a big screen where all the pods were, and he saw when people were in the stations, and he moved the pod to the station, because these are these are sort of self-operating. They don't have drivers, and they're remotely moved around, so that when Kensington had a crowd, they could move 100 pods to Kensington and move them all over the place. And wow, wouldn't that be nice? That in the island. Sorry to talk about that when we were talking about heritage, but heritage and success needs solutions such as that. Think outside of the box, and imagine Barbados being the first place in this part of the world, and they're doing it in other parts of the world, these pods. Sorry, taking too much time.
Thank you for that, the daydreaming, Sir Paul. And I think some of these ideas are obviously quite important when you're looking at ways in which you can bring life back and solve problems like congestion. I think we're going to have to take maybe a couple more questions fairly quickly, Yolanda, because
yes, I have two more quickly, and both for Sir Paul. So one is from Georgina Calendar, and the question is, has the idea of a fully or partially pedestrian city been considered in the new plans for Bridgetown? I can answer part of that in terms of the development plan context, in terms of the community plan. Yes, it has, but I think she's asking you in terms of your own reimagining of the space. if that's what you have also conceptualized, and also one from Philip Mears, who has noted the redevelopment of the Copacabana area, Bel Air Jazz Club, and wants to know if that is part of the revitalization vision that you have for Bridgetown.
Okay, let me answer Georgina Calendar first by saying that, you know, the full vision of creating these pedestrian areas is something that I know that has been discussed, and yes, I would like to see some of that. And again, I am not a planner. I haven't done all the studies, and I don't want to take responsibility for commenting beyond where my jurisdiction lies, and that is in this kind of dreaming up these spaces. And again, take examples from the most successful parts of the world that where people want to go because there's freedom of movement without having to get knocked down by something flying by you. And so I support that. And with regard to the Copacabana, I can tell you that I know the people that operate that business, and they have, again, reimagined that business to some extent. The Virgin connection, where Virgin was using it as a check-in, check-out for their traveling clients, is now morphing into something that is more of they call it a suit-free, as in a suit that you wear, so that they have people that go there to work remotely. And that kind of a space is what it's changing into. So as I described the changes that are occurring, that they are occurring because of everything around us is changing. And we are emerging from this pandemic into a new world. We can only wait and see what else pops up. But yes, these are great ideas that need to be sort of expanded on.
I'd like to use this opportunity to thank Sir Paul greatly for stimulating the amount of discussion that we've had, and to Janice and Richard. I think we could carry on this discussion for hours, but we've decided with these sessions to limit them to an hour and a half to give us a flavor of things, and we will pick things up at further sessions. So as I say, I'd like to thank all three panelists for their excellent contributions. And I'd also like to say, this is not the end of the story. We're planning further sessions. And our next session, which we hope to have in April or May, will focus on residential, the importance of getting people living back in the centre, and what we need to do to make it happen. Because I think that you know, everybody who's been to big cities around the country knows that the thing that actually makes a living and successful city is having people there. And people living, people working, people playing, people communicating together. And I think that is important. So our next session will concentrate on how we get people back into Bridgetown. But I think this has been a brilliant start to our sessions, and will certainly give us a lot to think about as we go forward. So on behalf of the Town Planning Society, can I thank you all for attending? And thank in particular Sir Paul, Janice Cumberbatch and Richard Gill for their very, very useful contributions. Thank you again. And I'll close this session at that point.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Goodbye.